The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
A relaxing dip in a natural hot spring? The perfect end to a great vacation, right? But luck can change in a hurry.
I could feel that hot, bubbling, and acidic mud essentially just burning through my skin.
And when you're stuck, you hope someone's there to help you get out.
She can lose blood pressure. She can lose her pulse. I was like, not okay. You're not going to die here.
Search for Tell Me What Happened, an original podcast by OnStar, to hear true stories about people who take risks to help others.
It's a cold open. Well, no,
Let's start with a production meeting about what we're going to do.
Okay, what are we going to do? I heard somebody told me we needed more
First of all, we have
jokes.
to pick who our body doubles are going to be for the thumbnail, like famous actors, which is what we started on before.
Oh, and it's going to be Bruce Willis.
And what we want
Thomas.
the theme music
According
to
to
be.
the...
We're going to completely overhaul the presentation of the podcast.
Yeah.
New thumbnail, is that what you were saying before?
New thumbnails.
New music. We're
music.
basically a bit envious of the other podcasts. We feel a bit like the second cousin locked in the basement while they're showered and quality takeaway foods and photo shoots.
Look at that. They've got a wooden block with the hashtag and their name on it.
It's Real Pod over there. Yeah. So
don't say their name.
This is actually our 50th podcast. Have we started this podcast now? I suppose we have. Kia ora tātou, this is Gone by Lunchtime. I'm Toby Manhire, that's Annabelle Lee. And that's Ben Thomas.
We made it. 50.
50. It might have been 50 the last. Anyway, 50-ish.
Yeah, it's
That's a lot.
It's in the area of 50.
And so it's time for a rebrand, isn't it?
Yeah.
A reshuffle.
We get gold cards too, right?
And then from here we're going to kick on and see if we can get that 5%. Yeah. And we rebrand as a political party. We'll have a co-leadership, which will be Ben Thomas, me, Annabelle Lee, and Tina Tiller, who's over there, our producer. Hi, Tina.
Like a quad co-leadership.
Yes.
Split 4 ways.
That's right.
I like it.
What are we going to talk about today? Oh, thank you very much to Flick Electric, who are wonderful sponsors. Click on any politics page and go through and check them out. They're terrific. Also,
they've given me free electricity for a year.
So much
Very
free
grateful.
electricity. It's coming out your ears.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I'd never say this, and I should. If you don't think this podcast is lamentably terrible, then review us and give us a rating, because that apparently is really good if you want to get more people to listen to your podcast.
Yeah, and there's only so many times we can rate and review ourselves. Eh?
What do you mean?
There's only so many fake email addresses we can set up for our fake iTunes accounts for our fake comments about how fake we are.
$50,000 in credit card debt because of all the American Expresses I've ordered to set up new iTunes accounts.
Awesome.
I don't know how to unsubscribe to Audible. It's just...
Yeah, neighbourly. That's tricky also. What are we going to talk about? We talk about the budget, right? The new look Gone by Lunchtime podcast budget special. Budget was just recently, almost a fortnight ago. Is that right?
No, it was last week.
Was it last week?
It was last week.
It was last week.
You've become too used to the New Zealand.
Although if you count the leaky start, then it's more than a week. It's over a week for the pre-budget announcements via National.
New Zealand has been so completely transformed by the Wellbeing budget, you can't remember a time before it.
No. Although
you can't remember a time before the storm clouds, the fork lightning.
There has been a lot of bad weather since the Wellbeing budget, which does make you wonder about well-being and also climate change. Is it real?
I mean, it's actually interesting. Climate change isn't in the well-being measures, This is because if you fundamentally go back to what the wellbeing budget is all about, the Treasury has a living standards framework, which is this sort of like Dungeons and Dragons nerd graph on their website, where they have like 12 characteristics like strength, agility, housing, knowledge and skills.
Does it have? Do they have like emojis with those, like the biceps one for strength and like a key?
And some of those,
I'm sure that's the last project
like a die 20
was working on.
I love that Dungeons. I've got a die 20 here. We're just going to roll the die 20.
And yeah, so I mean, the roots of the wellbeing budget are that wellbeing could really be anything, because it's been portrayed as this this laser-like focus on mental health, and the wellbeing is the sort of wellbeing is the guiding star of this government. But actually, wellbeing could be anything. Wellbeing, one of the measures of wellbeing is income and consumption. So actually, by buying more plastic shit, we would be increasing wellbeing for large parts of the community. And balancing those many varied factors, once you break the 12 down into subcategories, there's about 100 categories of well-being that the government that Treasury with its big data and its algorithms is somehow optimizing, to get the most perfectly well-being society ever. So it's all sort of nonsense. If we could just sort of proceed on that basis.
Is it nonsense? I mean, on a kind of macro general level, it sends a message to everyone, So that's part of what you do when you make big decisions about spending. And also it's only for the new money, right? So all the stuff that has come through from the past doesn't sit within the framework. And the big change from this budget, the banner item, is the mental health investment, right? Which is almost undeniably a well-being related measure, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, look, everything that government does is really about well-being. There's never been a malignancy budget where the government will sort of put $2 billion over the next 4 years towards infecting children with diseases, or, paying people to kneecap senior citizens as they go about their business. That stuff isn't done on government budget spending. This idea that somehow this budget is uniquely focused with making people's lives better, as opposed to previous budgets which were about undeniably making people's lives worse through using the coercive powers of the state and its economic resources, just doesn't really stack up. Because again, of course, mental health is about our well-being, and rhetorically it connects with well-being in the public mind, which is probably why it was such an easy sell for the government. But again, so is income and consumption. That's about well-being. Community engagement is about well-being. So street parties could have gotten a huge injection of investment in the budget and still been within that framework.
But you could argue that, like, the last government's budgets were primarily concerned with the well-being of the economy or business rather than people, right?
Yeah, I mean, you could, but then tax cuts just go towards people's income, which is still one of the measures of well-being that the government has. No government's budget has ever just been about the numbers. There's this idea that, we've moved away from a pure focus on GDP. There was never a pure focus on GDP. Nobody ever goes to the polls thinking, growth rates were good this year. They go to the polls thinking, I'm earning more than I was 3 years ago, or milk costs more than it used to. If you have higher consumer prices, your GDP will actually be bigger generally, but that doesn't mean people are happier. And that's never been the case. People have never made a strict induction from GDP numbers towards how happy they feel with the government of the day. Anyway, we could talk about this forever, and I probably will, so unless you want to turn off my mic or something.
Annabelle, do you think it was the question that a lot of people have been asking, is this a transformational budget? Are there transformational things in it? Is it the sort of, is there enough of a change? Mental health we talked about, but there are various other things in terms of infrastructure for rail and other elements. Do you feel like it fulfills on the transformational promises?
I think there's some really great stuff in there. It's good to see increased spending on mental health, new money for whānau order, new money period. But in terms of being transformative, is it transforming? Does it make that transformer
Is it more
noise
than
when I
meets the
think
eye?
of it.
Is it more than meets the eye?
Meets the eye?
That was
know.
Bowen House's poor structural foundations when you were down there. There was a 2.0 tremor.
I mean, I see that there's like an increase for beneficiaries, but it seems to me that, the best way to support children living in poverty or raising them out of poverty is to put some massive spending into that area in terms of, most children who live in poverty are the children of beneficiaries. So the easiest way to target them, certainly the simplest, would be to put more money in their parents' pocket. And I don't know if there's really been enough spending in that area. To me, is it 500 million? Doesn't look like enough.
And they've pegged benefits to wages.
They've pegged increases in benefits to wages. So they've compared that to superannuation.
Most would agree is kind of overdue, but still superannuation is
what makes superannuation.
Pie,
what makes superannuation a big ticket item is not the fact that its increases are pegged to increases in the average wage. It's the fact that it's pegged to 66% of the average wage, which is much higher than benefits. And of course, it's paid to everybody regardless of their income or their assets.
And it's an ageing population.
Yes, it's
interesting. I mean, it's we can go back to the capital gains tax decision that the Prime Minister made. It's the same thing in a way. It's just like the untouchable areas that thou shalt not.
And so even though, obviously these increases to benefits were much less than the Welfare Expert Advisory Group recommended, the government rejected those recommendations. And there is an important political point in terms of where the money was spent this budget. Obviously, huge investment in mental health, long overdue. Probably an easier sell for the government because in politics something only stops being an issue and starts becoming a crisis once it starts affecting middle class and rich people as well as poor people. By definition, poverty only affects poor people, whereas the mental health crisis has spun so far out of control that now middle class people who are likely to vote have, all of their lives have been touched by people with varying degrees of mental health problems. The one thing that brings us all together as New Zealanders is we're all a bit sad and mental.
Yeah.
One of the other interesting things to come out of the budget was the appearance, seemed to me very clearly, of New Zealand First beginning their campaign for the 2020 election, if indeed they didn't begin it at the end of the 2017 election, and that there was at a lunch hosted by Grant Thornton, with whom we did a bunch of content that you can read on the spin-off around the budget. Shane Jones gave a speech in which he very directly, unprompted, said to this audience of business people had come to the Prime Minister after her last lunch for Business New Zealand and said, "Where's the big announcement?" He said, "Well, the big announcement, I'll tell you right now, is we killed capital gains tax." He, absolutely, it's not as though he's being remotely ambiguous about it or at all attempting to talk around it. It's we did it. And then he went on to talk about plans to, what was the word he used? Coalesce or something. Conflate was the word he used. The ports, Tauranga, Auckland and Northport, which is a big thing. And it's kind of like, but then he makes it clear that he's really talking about what he would like to do if gain the mandate for that and so on. So it feels a bit like that. And then next year we'll have a big election budget. And I don't know, it feels like we're almost in election mode again.
We are almost in election mode again.
That's exciting.
I mean, there was a bit of criticism from the opposition. What was Simon Bridges' line? Trains, not teachers. Simon Bridges, somebody was
teachers, not trains.
There was money for trains, but not for teachers.
Right. What about trains for teachers? I mean,
that would help save money. We should do that.
That's all right. They can all live in Hamilton to avoid Auckland living costs, and they can be connected through probably low-speed rail.
Yeah,
they don't start till 9 and finish at 3.
They can probably afford to get an apartment in Huntly, and then they can travel into Parnell on the train to teach at the school. The train funding, there's about $300 million for regional rail, and that was really trumpeted by the government.
That's not new money. That's money that has come out of the Provincial Growth Fund from Shane Jones.
Yes.
So
which is all spent now.
No, it's not.
It's all allocated.
Oh, no.
Yes,
no, there's way more. There's so much more. There's about $1 billion left.
I think they've allocated all of it.
So anyway, the regional rail was criticised by some, saying, trains is like old technology, it's looking at the past. The real point there is, if you didn't spend this money on trains, you'd just be leaving $300 million more for Shane Jones to spend as he sees fit. So it's probably whatever you spent it on would be a better use of money. If they just bought $300 million worth of cowboy hats to store at the Beehive or folding tables, all a better investment than leaving it in the Provincial Growth Fund.
The lead up to the budget, of course, was a sort of 5-part drama centering around, originally the National Party put out a series of press releases in which contained elements of the budget that they were doing big spoilers on. And the first one, each of them was relatively innocuous. None of them was a massive headline number, but cumulatively it started to become the story, not so much necessarily the substance of them, but the fact of them, given that the parts of the budget that aren't choreographically provided by the government themselves are kept under strict lock and key, and so for the opposition to have access to them was a big deal. And then that ramped up even more because the Treasury came out, the Treasury Secretary, Gabrielle McClurf, came out and said that their systems had been compromised. There was a hack. They'd gone to the police. Then Grant Robertson, the Finance Minister, followed up with another press release saying this was very serious and that the National Party must cease immediately feeding material into the public domain. And then what happened? Who wants to pick up the yarn from
Well, can
there?
I just say that when we refer to it as a drama, it's like kind of Young and the Restless dynasty level drama, not like House of Cards or Line of Duty or like Handmaids, like daytime soap
I might have
drama.
to pick you up on the Dynasty point there. Dynasty's quite a high quality drama.
I hear the remake is very good.
I haven't seen the remake.
Neither. But the thing is, do most people obviously there's been a massive balls up and Treasury looks terrible in terms of the way they've responded and managed this. But in terms of the actual information that was being leaked, I feel like nobody really cares that much. But what I do think is interesting is the way that National are positioning this as an act of righteousness on their part. Like they've found a way of getting information that wasn't meant to be seen, and they've done that not unlawfully. But it's a little bit like if you leave a purse open, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's okay to just go in and remove all the contents from it. But if you,
Is this a message for your children?
Yeah,
Bells,
they do that all the time.
Right.
But I feel like National would have been more righteous if they'd got the information and then handed it over rather than running it. I feel like if you're going to position yourself as doing this for righteous reasons, you kind of lose that moral high ground when you then sort of drip feed it into the media, but then who really cares, because you're going to find out in 2 days what's in it. We have the worst leaks in New Zealand. Can someone leak stuff that would never find out unless you leaked it? We get leaked stuff that you're going to find out in 2 days anyway. It's so annoying. Come on, up your game.
To repeat something I've said already, there was something very authentic in New Zealand about it, and that at one point the Politic website was speculating about whether this data hack might involve nefarious Russian interests.
It was so exciting for a minute.
Turned out it was someone tapping some search things into the search bar.
Yeah, typing the phrase 2019/20 into Treasury's public website search bar.
And I have a sneaking suspicion you'll have some opinions on this matter, Ben, but to Annabelle's point, that it is still it was accessing information which was known to be secret information.
Yeah.
Right? Say your piece, Ben Thomas.
Buckle in. First up, because terminology seems to have become important here as all these fucking nerds online start weighing in about what's hacking and what's not hacking. Secret is, an official classification in the government. I used to have a top secret special clearance. Top secret, not top secret special.
Did you have a ID that you could flash to people?
No, I think you just had a letter. You had a letter saying that you'd gotten it.
Right.
And
did you carry that around with you?
I pinned it to my wall. You're not. I don't think you're meant to tell anyone though. I think if you tell people, that proves you're not trustworthy and they revoke it. I'm not sure anyway.
Okay.
So you're leaking right now.
This is a leak.
This is a leak. This is a New Zealand leak.
Exclusive.
I know. In concert with the AFP, the SIS will bust down these doors, and so budget documents don't have that status. There's no criminal offence of releasing a budget document ahead of time. They're not national security documents. Some of the information can be market moving. None of the stuff that was released by National was. The preference of governments these days, it used to be that the budget all happened on one day. It contained, new information about taxes. It was the first time that you knew whether the government was in surplus or deficit for that year. But since the days of the Longy government, there have been, there's almost sort of continuous disclosure from Treasury about how the government's books are looking and how their projections are going. As Toby, you said, the government itself does many pre-budget announcements to build up hype for the budget.
Used to have a birthday, right? They used to have a birthday on the day, and you just maybe do something on your birthday, maybe not. Now some people seem to think that you should have a whole festival of birthday.
That's like a birthday
like
week.
A whole week and kind of different observances of the birthday.
It's exactly what it's like.
It's a lot like that. And, Unfortunately, National came along, on the wrong day and, opened the presents early or, spoiled the gift, said, what did you think of the book Susan got for you before she presented it?
Opened up all the champagne and just left it sitting there.
Until it went flat, but didn't pour it for anyone.
Found the 6-pack and 3 bags
of
chips that you had provided for visitors, but ate it all before anyone arrived. So, there's no high crime, there's no sedition or treason or anything from National doing this. As an opposition, they're perfectly entitled, having stumbled across this information essentially and then poked around a bit more, to let it out and embarrass the government. Where things went awry is Gabriel Gabs McLoof,
I love how everyone is now on not just first name terms, but abbreviated first name terms with our mate Gabs.
Our mate Gabs, who has turned Treasury, the most powerful and influential central government agency, which not only looks after the government's books, but also oversees all policy advice and new legislation that goes to the government. He's turned it into some sort of weird 70s hippie commune where everyone's playing the heartwork card games and considering their moon feelings and doing reverse internships where recent grads follow around senior managers and write reports on their performance. And it's all just turned into a weird new age shit show, basically, which wouldn't be a problem if Treasury was doing its job properly. But what seems to have happened is that, there was, either a bug or an admin error or whatever that allowed some of this information to be discovered by National.
Who hired that guy?
It would have been during the National government. Yeah.
I mean, yeah. And he's
but
as many of you know, he's off to Ireland to lead their Reserve Bank, I think.
And he's
leaving anyway, but that's only slightly softened the calls for his resignation.
But the issue is that he's meant to be a neutral public servant. He's meant to provide and oversee the provision of objective, neutral advice to the government, which they can then sort of, decide their own actions from. What's happened is that, by going public on this sort of hacking fantasy and sort of evoking images of Russians and Chinese spies and Julian Assange poking around in the good New Zealand deep web or whatever, he caused a lot of alarm. That, people started really, thinking that something pretty momentous was happening, right? This hasn't happened anywhere in the world. The US Fed doesn't get hacked by the Chinese. They try all the time, right? But
for a fleeting moment there, we thought we were an important country. Is that what you're saying?
But and then what happened is that, when the Nats scheduled a press conference to announce how they had gotten in, then Gabs came clean and said, "Look, actually, what happened is, there was the police have said there's no criminal activity. They're not going to press charges, that we just uploaded the wrong stuff by accident. And that's fair enough. You probably get away with that as a neutral civil servant. But but his advice somehow this turned into a public spectacle of thinking that the National Party, or basically implying that the National Party were involved in some kind of criminal hacking conspiracy. And
to be fair, he did that interview on RNZ where he was like, it's like there's a caged room and there's a tiger and a bar and a locksmith and a code and buttons
and Annabelle's
and
purse.
it's one little button and then
there's a giant marshmallow padlock on Annabelle's purse.
Yeah.
And everyone has stood around like on Bugsy Malone, and they're all going for it at the same time.
That's right.
And there's a massive explosion.
That's exactly what he said.
That's what he
then.
said.
And so at that stage he would have known the truth. They had been updated, earlier by the authorities, and so he's coming up with these wild metaphors, and either he led the finance minister to implicitly associate the National Party with some kind of criminal conduct, which as a public servant he should not have done, or he was in cahoots with the finance minister, which we don't have any evidence of, but that's another possibility of how it could have happened. In either case, he should be on his goddamn way, and he shouldn't be allowed to serve out his time. He should be sacked.
Off with his head.
Yes, that's certainly one solution. The Grant Robertson, the finance minister's position is that he was relaying information that was provided to him. There's some question about whether there was a meeting that happened at some crucial time where they gathered together and what was happening there.
There was a meeting between the two most senior staff in the Prime Minister's office.
There's a sort of more prosaic explanation, isn't there, which is that there were people within Treasury. There was an error in terms of putting material on the clone drive that was searchable. To explain to anyone who hasn't sort of picked up on this already, basically by putting in lots and lots of different search terms, they discovered that you would get the sort of surrounding text, and then by essentially sellotaping, patching all of that together, you could get enough information that you could then put out a press release.
It's a lot of work, 2,000 times for like a little bit of information. I'm like, but is that really the best use of your time?
We shouldn't mischaracterise it as some fishing expedition,
or something,
right?
or
so the first search term that they entered, according to the National Party, was 2019/20, which is a search I did myself on the Treasury website because I wanted to know details about the announcement and whatever had already been put up. By doing that, they found material from the actual budget itself, which was probably stupefying to them. And so then they started searching for other terms that are in every budget, vote justice, whatever, and turned up other things. So it's wrong to characterise it, I think, as, this kind of furtive sort of mission of just, changing one digit and another digit and trying to hit pay dirt, when they actually they stumbled upon this, in actually quite an innocent manner, and then kept poking around.
And then I think did some sort of those fancy string searches and things, didn't they, to get all the information properly. I don't know. Yeah. Do you know, I've sometimes, if you go to, Google Books, where Google, just because they feel like it, have uploaded lots and lots of books. And sometimes you only get a preview field. And sometimes you're like, I really want to read the rest of that bit of that page on the book. You can do the same thing just by taking the last bit, putting that in a search. And then, so
clever.
I think Gabs Makloof is going to have to answer for that also. Meanwhile, in other political news of late, we had an early episode of Dynasty. We had the Christian Conservative Party's episode, which was, again, it was one of those things that it kind of, within the space of a few days,
2005 is back.
It was like Easter, there was all living and dying and what have you. We had Alfred Ngaro clearly being sanctioned by the National Party to float the idea or be reported as considering the idea of a breakaway Christian Conservative Party that could then potentially be gifted a seat by the National Party and create a dance partner for the lonely giant that is the National Party. And then
do you think the National Party gets R&D research credits for its incubator role for all these new parties? They're like growing all these potential coalition partners in vials, like in their lab. They're, what's happened to the Sustainable New Zealand Party? How are they doing? They're like one of those babies in jars.
Which one is that?
Is that
the Vernon Tava one?
Yeah.
Seriously, how pissed would you be if you were Vernon Tava when that came out, eh? It's like you were just dating and all of a sudden National's got a side chick.
Yeah.
It's so rude.
I think
and not even trying to hide it, like, hey.
But the political system encourages polyamorous relationships. That's the nature of it.
Yeah, but incest is a taboo in every society.
Right. That's a good link back to the Christian Conservative splinter groups. We also had the Motorcycle Party, the Brian Tamaki Party, the Hannah Tamaki Party, it turned out, wasn't going to be, and they expedited their launch of their, what's it being called as a party?
Is it Coalition New
Zealand?
Coalition
New Zealand. Do they have a snowball's chance in hell to choose a
No.
It's
funny
metaphor?
because I think that they're, clearly there is an opportunity for a new Māori political movement, but not that flavour. Māori not particularly Christian and not conservative, and actually the more conservative the Māori Party became, the more their vote dropped off. So no, I don't think that they're going to become a Wellington-based motorcycle gang.
Just doing a mea culpa for my people, which is white, urban, liberal, middle-class political commentators.
Kia ora.
This always happens, right? It happened with the Ngaro Party, and then suddenly the next week everyone was talking about it with Coalition NZ, and it happened when Destiny had a party back in 2005. And you always get these kind of people on Radio New Zealand sort of stroking their well-groomed beards, unlike mine, and sort of going, well, of course, Alfred Ngaro will be able to reach across the divide to a lot of disenchanted conservative Pacifica voters in South Auckland who might be looking for an alternative to Labour's socially progressive movement. Brian Tamaki is very well regarded in the Māori community, and so we'll have a lot of potential to pick up votes there. It's all nonsense, right? It's just all garbage. Destiny Church has 3,000 members, right? It looks very impressive in a community hall. It doesn't look great on polling day. Alfred Ngaro is a National Party MP. He would be standing as a coalition party partner for National. Whatever ties that urban liberal middle class commentators are talking about that exist in South Auckland, Pacifica communities to Labour don't depend on the anti-smacking bill or, they go much further back than that. 25% of people apparently decide how to vote on the day, but there's actually very few genuinely swinging voters in New Zealand who are going to jump over from one of the large parties to some small crackpot outfit that's just been, dreamed up in a lab somewhere or on a whiteboard. And yet we still get this narrative from commentators all the time.
Colin Craig got 3.7 though, right? I know that's not a slightly different point to the one you're making, but was it 3.7? I think that's something like that.
There's a 4% Christian vote that will or could be enticed to vote for conservative Christians. It's not a crossover Labour vote. It's people that are either National or New Zealand First or just don't vote or vote for crazed minnow parties in between.
But that's why the Ngaro Party, I thought, had some... it was always a long shot, and now he's announced it's not happening. So, no, I wouldn't do that. I'm loyal to the National Party, obviously.
How weird was that?
But if he could have got that, if he could have banked the Colin Craig numbers and then added some more from Pacifica communities, it doesn't seem like completely out of the.
I just think we've had Christian parties, one led by a millionaire with tons of coin to throw at it. And if they're not going to get over the line, then I don't see how Alfred Ngaro in South Auckland is going to get over the line.
The advantage that Ngaro would have had that Colin Craig didn't was the easy appearance of control and sanity in public
true.
and on the
Yeah.
campaign trail.
Yeah.
Nato is a credible
Some
politician.
dignity.
Probably
He's a
have the
smart
good
guy.
sense not to lie down in some long grass in an attempt to look sexy.
I don't know. Nato's poetry is probably better.
Annabelle, you have been. Can you talk about this? You've been working on a project involving Māori politicians years gone by. We don't really talk anymore about the Māori Party. We don't. They are off the radar. And do you have a sense of whether or not that's another small party? There is a Māori small party that could make it back in time for 2020.
At present, no. I think that if and when the next Māori political movement happens, it will have to be it will always be an issue-based one. There'll have to be something that galvanises te iwi Māori to stand together and push it forward. I don't think you could. I don't think you'd be very successful just setting one up to be a Māori party. I think it has to be in response to something, and the interesting thing will be what that issue is. I've seen there's quite a lot of talk on social media around the whole Not One More Baby movement. I don't think that will be the issue that does it, but it has to be that kind of kaupapa-based movement for it to get moving. Otherwise, it'll just flounder like lots of other Māori parties have before.
I actually think National missed their best opportunity to either reinvigorate or create a coalition partner, which was when Nuk Kuarako left. They should have given him the option of just quitting and becoming a Māori Party MP.
Right. I think you were going to say something about lost luggage, but
that wasn't even a gag. That was
Right.
That was just one of those sort of hindsight things that you sort of think,
Finally, there is talk of a Labour reshuffle. No, there is going to be a Labour reshuffle.
There's talk of it because it's happening.
At the end of June, I think, was when...
Yep.
Actually, hold that thought for 1 second. First of all, I just wanted to say on Simon Bridges, which I wanted to mention, do we think he's safe now, just very quickly? Because we can argue about the budget gazumping stuff, but he seems to have come out of that stronger. I mean, it was a pretty well organised bit of opposition politicking, right? He seems stronger now than he was a month ago?
Absolutely. Well, a month ago there was a lot of conjecture about whether he'd make it to the election. He's definitely bought himself another year.
A year? What do you reckon about?
I disagree, to be honest. I think that the reality is I think the leak issue has definitely given him confidence and perhaps some credibility in the eyes of his party, but that's not going to translate to votes, and it's not going to be reflected in the polls, and the next poll's going to happen and there's still going to be down in the dumps, and that will again cause the unrest within the party. So I think, he's had a temporary stay of execution, but it's temporary.
I agree, but I think National's still in denial about just how bad a 40% or 39% poll is right now.
Well, if it goes to 39, then he's almost sort of rod for his own back on that, hasn't he, Bridges? Because he's often said it's starting with 4, numbers starting with 4. I think when that changes, then he'll be under pressure. But last thing, and we're out of here, the reshuffle, end of the month. Any kind of hot tips on that from leading political insiders Ben Thomas and Annabelle Lee Mather, I beg your pardon? Is the Phil Twyford going to have some of his responsibilities relieved, you reckon?
No, same thing with Nick Smith in housing under John Key. Basically, you just ring fence that minister, make them a human punching bag or voodoo doll, or you don't. The housing portfolio right now is like Chernobyl. You don't send any more good people in to get irradiated or perish in there. You just seal it off with Phil Twyford inside and check on him in 3 years. And if he somehow made it through, you let him out again. But no, you'd just be throwing good ministers after bad. No, not that I think Phil Twyford is a bad minister, but obviously housing has failed to perform. But and who would you replace him with? Who is particularly talented? Audrey Young raised the idea that Trevor Mallard might actually come back to the ministry. Now,
really?
Now he would actually be. I think that was more sort of a suggestion than a realistic speculation. But Mallard, for all of his idiosyncrasies, was a very, very good minister in the Clark government. And I think his performance as Speaker shows that he still does have a lot of sympathies with the government of his party, and is probably in his heart is not a true non-partisan, and so could actually make a very strong contribution if he went back, and he could handle any of those troubled portfolios. But I don't think that they'll move Twyford for that reason.
I thought they were going to give all the portfolios to
Farfoyle. Farfoyle will probably get about sort of 10 bundled together. He'll be set to building the Kiwi built houses.
Still be outside cabinet.
The reshuffle is they'll just give him a hammer and be like, we need 1,500 houses by the election. Get moving. No, Farfoyle will go into cabinet finally. He'll become New Zealand's first Tokelauan cabinet minister.
Kapai.
Annabelle, hot tips.
I think that Penny will probably get a promotion in the reshuffle. What I
Penny
will be watching carefully and with great interest is to see what happens with Meka Whaitiri. I think if she was to be brought back into cabinet, that would be an absolute act of hypocrisy, given all the talk we've had about bullying in Parliament and the culture of bullying, and that the report found that more than likely she had, but she remains in denial about it, and it kind of remains unaddressed. It'll be very interesting to see what happens with Meka.
She was actually doing proactive media at the beginning of the year, campaigning to be reinstated, which I think will have ended any chance she had of being reinstated. I think she's gone. Kiri Ellen Tapu might find herself as a parliamentary secretary. I think
outside cabinet.
So not a minister, but an undersecretary. Audrey Young. I tend to agree with Audrey Young's analysis that was in the Herald, which was that Michael Wood will move up to become a minister outside cabinet. He's very capable, and then there'll be a position to fill there, which they'll want to encourage some of the talented backbenchers, and Kiri Ellen is probably the standout in that respect.
Yeah, she's done very well.
She's a goodie.
She wrote a campaign diary for the Spin-Off website, which you can read, along with many other pieces of writing and video and podcasts such as On the Rag and Real Pod. They're the podcasts that get all the love showered on them.
God, why do you have to give them free publicity?
We keep on trying. We keep on trying, and we're going to be back in rebranded form in a fast approaching year, maybe even this year. Thanks, Annabelle.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Ben.
It's always a pleasure.
Thanks, Tina.
Thank you, Tina, for getting me some of the Real Pod's cheesy bread.
Oh, cheesy bread.
They get cheesy bread.
I get cheesy bread.
God's sake.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards the
most radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on The Spin-Off or wherever you get your podcasts.
Kia ora, I'm Alex Casey, Senior Writer at The Spin-Off. We wouldn't exist without the ongoing support of our generous members. If you're able to, you can make a donation at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spin-Off Podcast Network.